Hey everyone, welcome to another video. So in this video, we'll try and understand all about the composition scheme under GST and what you can think of doing before 31st March 2026 if you want to avail this particular scheme and pay GST at a low rate of 1% and 6% respectively. Now, for any person having a GST number, otherwise called a registered person, he basically has two options on the GST portal. One, he can continue to stay as a normal taxpayer and pay tax at the normal rate of 5% or 18% GST, which is standard rate in most cases. Or he could go for something called a composition scheme, which is basically meant for small taxpayers whose aggregate turnover is not exceeding the prescribed limits and having simplified tax rates of 1% and 6% respectively, and reduces compliance costs to a great extent. So therefore, in this video, the objective is to, number one, understand what this composition scheme is all about and what you can do before 31st March 2026 if you want to avail the scheme from the next financial year 26-27. So first things first, and that is, what is the composition scheme? Now this scheme, like I said before, is meant for small taxpayers, and therefore those taxpayers whose aggregate turnover in the preceding financial year is not exceeding rupees 1.5 crores. So if you talk about financial year 25-26, then the criteria to go for composition scheme in 26-27 would be that in 25-26 your aggregate turnover from April to March should not be more than 150 lakhs or 1.5 crores. If it is exceeding, then you cannot go for composition. If it is equal to or less than 1.5 crores of turnover in 25-26, then from 26-27 onwards, you can very well opt for the composition scheme. And instead of paying the GST at a standard 18%, you can even continue to pay at 1% or 6%, depending upon the type of person you are under composition scheme. Now, this is predominantly applicable for a manufacturer, a trader, and a restaurant service provider. Once you come into the composition levy or composition scheme, then for a manufacturer, the GST rate is only 1%, basically CGST 0.5 and SGST 0.5%. Same is the case of a trader of goods. And for a restaurant service provider, it is 5%, basically 2.5 CGST and 2.5 SGST. So for a manufacturer of goods, trader of goods, restaurant service provider, if the aggregate turnover in the preceding financial year is not crossing 150 lakhs or 1.5 crores, then they can choose to pay GST under the composition scheme at 1% and 5% respectively. Now, the basic question here is whether this is only applicable on the supply of goods, because I mentioned manufacturer and or trader of goods. Well, if you're a manufacturer or if you're a trader and your aggregate turnover limits are all below 150 crore or 150 lakhs, and you want to provide some amount of services also, then this particular scheme allows you to do that. And the amount of services or the value of service that you can provide should not be greater than the higher of rupees 5 lakhs or 10% turnover in a particular state. So if you are a manufacturer trader and you're providing some quantum of services also, then the value of that quantum should not be higher of 5 lakh rupees or 10% turnover in a state. So you can be a trader manufacturer of goods and also provide a marginal value of services. And for those who are exclusively involved in services, not a manufacturer trader of goods, but exclusively involved in services, for them, the aggregate turnover limit in the preceding financial year is not 1.5 crores, but it is only 50 lakhs. So if your turnover is not exceeding 50 lakhs in the preceding financial year and you're exclusively dealing in services, then you can also very well go for the composition scheme or composition levy under the section 10 of this CGST Act, wherein for service providers, you end up paying only 6% GST when compared to a high rate of 18%. So basically it is 3% CGST and 3% SGST. So summarizing, if your aggregate turnover as a manufacturer or a trader of goods or a restaurant service provider in the preceding financial year is not exceeding 150 lakhs, then in the upcoming financial year, you can very well go for composition scheme where you're paying tax GST at the rate of 1% or 5% respectively. If you are providing services also on the side, then the value of that services under this particular scheme cannot be higher than the higher of 5 lakhs or 10% turnover in a particular state for that particular person. And if you're only involved in services exclusively, then for you, your aggregate turnover limit in the preceding financial is not 150 lakhs, but only 50 lakhs. So if you're within that limit, you can very well go for this particular composition scheme and pay tax at 3 plus 3, 6% rate of GST. Well, things are not always a bed of roses, and therefore this scheme has a lot of conditions attached to it. Quite a few restrictions, very important restrictions. Number one, once you are under the composition levy, you cannot undertake any interstate sales. The moment you have interstate sales of goods or services or both, then you need to come out of composition scheme and go for the regular or the normal scheme. So you cannot undertake any interstate supplies, number one. Number two, for all your inward supplies, if you are a composition dealer and if you're buying goods and you're paying GST, on that GST, you cannot take input tax credit, which basically means that if you are a composition dealer and you are providing services or you're a manufacturer trader of goods providing goods to another person and you are a composition dealer, then whatever GST that you incurred on your purchases, you cannot take the ITC for it. When you issue a tax invoice to this particular person, the rule says that you cannot charge GST on it. This whatever 1% GST is something that you should self-calculate and pay from your pocket. The government is giving you that much of freedom because it's a low rate of GST and you're supposed to pay it from your pocket. So therefore, there is no GST credits in this particular scheme that is allowed. And if you are a dealer, trader, manufacturer, or a service provider providing goods or services through e-commerce operators, e-commerce supplies, then they are also out of the composition levy. You cannot come under this particular composition scheme. So if you're involved in interstate supplies, you cannot go for CL, composition levy. If you want to take input tax credit on inward supplies, you cannot do so under this particular scheme. And if you want to supply goods or services through e-commerce operators, you must come out of composition scheme and go for the regular or the normal scheme. These are the three main conditions attached to this particular scheme, because the government says that it's giving you a big relief by paying tax at only 1% and 6%. So you need to follow some conditions. So what the ultimate question is, what you need to do before 31st March 2026 if you fulfill all the criteria and want to come under composition scheme. So to opt for the composition scheme, basically in financial year 26-27, the upcoming financial year, you need to file a statement in CMP02, which is an intimation that you give to the GST department before 31st March 2026, close of the financial year, that you would like to opt for composition scheme. You are satisfying all the conditions, whether it is aggregate turnover, whether it's only intrastate supplies, CGST, SGST, there is no IGST at all as a question in composition scheme, and that you don't want to avail any GST credits on your inward supplies. So before the end of the financial year, you need to file the statement in CMP02. Only then will you be only then will the effective date be 1st April 2026, which basically means that from April 2026 onwards, for one financial year 26-27, you will be tagged under the composition scheme or composition levy, and for this you can end up paying tax at a 1% or 6% than the regular normal 18% rate of GST. Well, I hope I was able to make things clear in this particular video. If you like the video, you could show support to us by hitting the like button. If you want more videos of these on regular basis through way of notifications, you could also think of hitting on the subscribe button. Till then, I'll see you guys in the next video. Take care and thank you.